Good evening, everybody. Thanks very much for tuning in. We're going to have a fun program tonight. We have Vijay Jayaraj, our contributing researcher from India, on the program with us, and we're going to go through a number of different subjects in pretty rapid succession. So it should be a lot of fun. Excuse me. I'm Cal Beisner, the founder and national spokesman of the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. We are a network of just under 70 scholars, about a third natural scientists, a third economists, and a third theologians and philosophers and ministry leaders, dedicated to educating the public and policymakers together on economic development for the very poor, biblical earth stewardship, and the gospel of Jesus Christ, all tied together. Every month, we offer a special resource, an educational resource, as our way of saying thank you when folks make a donation of literally any size, no matter how large or small, and request it. This month, our feature is Fix America's Forests, a wonderful study out of the Property and Environment Research Center in Bozeman, Montana. And this utterly gives the lie to the notion that climate change has been the primary or even a very significant driver of the increase in wildfires in the western United States over the last few years. Instead, there are forest management problems that are really at the root of all of that. So to ask for your copy, just go to cornwallalliance.org, click on the donate button, and as you fill out the donation form, when you come to the comments field, simply write in promo code 21-05 or the title Fix America's Forests, and we will be glad to send this to you. Do act quickly, though. We're near the end of the month, and we're running low on supply as well. So be sure to do that before midnight on May 31st, and we'll be sure to get a copy out to you. So again, tonight's topics are many in this case. We're going to be talking about the recent COVID boom in India, a very sad thing. Vijay has been keeping track on that, the second wave there. We do know that things are improving, but it's slow. And then we'll be talking about a variety of different energy and actually foreign relations issues related to energy and climate change and climate policy. So just want to give you a little bit of information about Vijay as we get started. Vijay is not actually on the staff of the Cornwall Alliance, but he writes a great deal for us. He earned his Master's of Science in Environmental Studies from the University of East Anglia in 2010, where he worked with professors who were part of the Climatic Research Unit, which was at the very center and continues to be at the center of climate research around the world, and was the center of the ClimateGate scandal in 2009 and 2011. He began his career working for AECOM in the UK as a field ecologist. In 2011, he moved to the forests of India to help a local NGO with tiger conservation and human and wildlife conflict. From 2012 to 2015, Vijay was a research assistant with the Changing Ocean Research Center at the University of British Columbia, one of the leading research units for studies on the impact of climate change on marine life, the output of which is used for determining the harmful impacts of climate change in the United Nations assessment reports. Vijay has spent time working in the field of environmental consultancy and has used his environmental expertise in the implementation of large-scale developmental projects of the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank in India. He also served as the assistant director of the Federation of the Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, where he helped the industry get accustomed to the new practices in life cycle assessment and pollution-free technology. You can follow him on Twitter at Vijay Jayaraj underscore CC. That's at Vijay Jayaraj underscore CC. So welcome here. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and welcome Vijay. Glad to have you on.
It's my pleasure, Cal, to be back doing a show with you. And good evening to everyone.
Thank you. And folks, keep in mind that Vijay is in India even as we talk. He, in fact, never went to bed last night. It's 10 and a half hours earlier there than it is for me here in Central Time in the US. 9.5 hours earlier, or yes, 9.5 hours earlier than the Eastern Time Zone. So we particularly appreciate Vijay's self-denial of sleep in order to be able to join us at this incredibly early hour for him and a very comfortable hour for all of us. So tonight we're going to talk briefly about some of your most recent articles, Vijay, 10 if we can fit that many into our time. You wrote all of these in your role as contributor for Developing Countries for Cornwall Alliance. Very quickly, Vijay, what led you to pursue such close cooperation with the Cornwall Alliance?
When I first found out about the organization, what struck me was that Cornwall Alliance was very particular in alleviating poverty as in developing countries. And to do that, they addressed the environmental policies that were biased and which were exaggerated and influenced too much by the climate change agenda. So there needed to be a balance, and they addressed that particular policy sphere which dealt with environment and the reduction of poverty in countries like India, where I'm from. So that was my passion as well, having graduated with a master's in environmental sciences and being from a poor country as India. And so that struck a chord, and that was one of the reasons I decided to be closely associated with the Cornwall Alliance. And being from a poor country as India. And so that struck a chord, and that was one of the reasons I very closely associated with the Cornwall Alliance. And being from a poor country
I see.
as India. And
so often is the case, I'm having trouble with my sound here. Give me a moment to try to fix this. Often is the case, I'm having trouble well, just have to work it that way. I'm so sorry. Wish that I were a techie, but I'm not. Okay, so your articles cover a whole lot of ground, and your latest one appeared on Cornwall Alliance's blog just a few days ago. It's titled, "When Wildlife and the Economy Flourish Together, a Case from India." In that, you wrote, quote, "India's GDP in 2000 was around US 468 billion. By 2019, the GDP was valued at US 2.8 trillion. That is a phenomenal achievement, and it certainly is, by the way. It would be easy to assume that such a rapid economic progression and the expansion of human settlements would have had a negative impact on India's wildlife. Why would some people make that assumption, Vijay?
That assumption has become a part of the public perception, and the main reason for that is that the mainstream media has been trying to brainwash people that economic growth means the destruction of forests. Even last month, Guardian put out an article, the Guardian from UK put out an article saying that the drive for economic growth is destroying our forests. So it is a common misconception, and I hear it everywhere. And so that is why I mentioned that it is common for people in this day and age, especially after climate change issue took off, to assume that forests get destroyed and species go extinct in millions because of industrial revolution and economic growth.
Okay, but you point out that during the same years that India managed to implement, that India grew so much economically, it also managed to implement strict conservation measures that would reap immense benefits on even a short term basis, leading to increased forest area and great success stories in wildlife conservation. Why and how did that happen?
That's because when economies grow, they have more power and means to implement best strategy, which is not possible when they are poor and when their economy is dependent on primitive technology and primitive raw materials. So, as India grew very rapidly and it became more industrialized, and there was economic uh, power to invest in conservation strategies, everything aligned together, and they were able to increase the forest area growth and besides implement a lot of other conservation strategies.
Yeah, as we often like to put it at the Cornwall Alliance, a clean, healthy, beautiful, safe environment is a costly good, and wealthier people can afford more costly goods than poorer people can. So, when you grow your economy, you enable your people to pursue good environmental stewardship better than otherwise. So, what happened then to the numbers of elephants and tigers in India during its rapid economic development?
Yeah, that is the most astonishing part. If anyone from the West looks at India, they would be thinking of us as a country that's rapidly developing, but also losing our natural resources at a crazy pace. But that's not been the case. In the past 14 years, India has managed to more than double its tiger population, and that is not an easy task given the complexity surrounding big cat conservation, and especially in a country where the forest area is just beginning to recover. So that is a testament to the fact that economic growth actually helped India to conserve one of the iconic species across the globe. It's known the Bengal tiger. So, yeah, that is a story of India. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, your next article is Oil May Hold Key to Reviving South Sudan's War Torn Economy at cnsnews.com on May 20. Many people know that Sudan has been the scene of genocidal warfare for several decades because it's one of the world's poorest countries. Businesses don't tend to do very well in the midst of warfare. In 2011, South Sudan broke off from the rest of the country and became an independent nation. And within 2 years, civil war broke out there, leading to over 400,000 deaths and 5 million people near starvation. Last year, though, the opposing sides achieved some peace, and now the country's poised for economic growth. What will be the main driver of that economic growth, Vijay, and why?
Well, oil has been the major driver of the economic growth in South Sudan for a while now, and it holds the biggest share when it comes to revenue from exports. Clearly, the oil sector plays a big role, a huge role in South Sudan's economy. In fact, when they separated from Sudan, there were a lot of talks going on regarding the sharing of pipelines and oil fields. So since then, the country has been very keen on developing the sector. And as you mentioned, when peace finally arrived recently, both the opposing parties jointly are working together, and they've been able to attract investments in oil and oil sector, and also uh, are putting out a tender for oil companies to explore further. And besides, they are also making policy changes that would enable oil companies to operate more freely. Yeah, so clearly, for a country that depends highly on oil, has been depending on oil, it holds much promise for the future. And given that 70% of the acreage in South Sudan is still unexplored, with potential oil resources, so it does have a huge potential, and we might expect the country to do well in the near future.
Okay, now this is something that you don't discuss in that article. A lot of observers have argued that a major oil discovery can be the very worst thing for the people of poor, badly governed countries because royalties from it support regimes that are, well, at best inept, more often badly corrupt, and sometimes really horribly oppressive. What do you see of the as the risks of that happening in South Sudan, and how likely is it that it will escape that problem? And what's necessary for it to be able to escape that problem?
Yeah, so with regard to that question, I would tend to think quite differently. Right now, only one in 100 South Sudan citizen has access to electricity, and majority of 80% of the population are below the poverty line. So this is not a situation where we pause or ask the oil exploration and the oil industry to stop working because we foresee an unstable political environment over there. So that is not the right approach, in my opinion, because the situation is already in dire circumstances, and so I would tend to disagree on that aspect, and I would say the oil sector, the growth in oil sector should continue, and if there is any political instability, then it should be dealt with on that particular period or day.
Okay. You also point out in your article, though, that South Sudan seems, even now, on the verge of renewed civil war. What will happen to its economy, including oil extraction and export, if that happens?
Yeah, so most of the oil fields in South Sudan are towards the northern region, and the eastern region is also very important with regard to this topic. So, and the most recent violence in the past few weeks has been on the eastern region, among two local militia groups, and the ruling powers has have been very silent on these disturbances. So analysts from the United Nations and elsewhere predict that we might have political instability on the cards in the near future. So no one really knows how long this peace could hold, and it might turn out to be good, or it could turn bad. Nobody has any clue. It all depends on what the local groups do and what the ruling party decides. Yeah.
Sounds like a real matter for prayer for Christians
Yeah.
around the world. There are many Christians in South Sudan, and another civil war there could be truly devastating to them. So we should be definitely praying about that. Well, having looked at India and North Africa, we turn now to the Middle East. In your article, Middle East Oil Burn Continues, Media Blackout on the Same, at masterresource.org on May 18, you start by referring to American President Joe Biden's Earth Day message, in which he urged oil guzzling countries to turn to renewable fuels to fight global warming. Then you point out that the developing countries all over the world, including in the Middle East, one of the world's primary oil producing regions, are doing exactly the opposite. They're actually increasing their use of oil. Why are they doing that?
Well, the equation is quite simple. Majority of the global countries depend on oil as a primary energy source, and it remains so. Even U.S. The boom in oil and gas industry has been the reason why it is today a energy superpower, and the case is same elsewhere. And every developing nation and developed nation, they depend on oil for transportation and for a lot of other industries as well. So if you are to take a book on the basics of energy, or an energy report that came out this year from any of the organizations, you would straight away see that oil is the predominant primary energy source across the world, oil and gas. So the reason Middle East continues to produce oil is that the demand for oil has not reduced, and it's not going to reduce despite the calls from the media.
You also note that the media in most of the West are ignoring this. Why do you suppose they're doing that?
Um, because if you acknowledge that the demand for oil is there, and countries in the Middle East are continuing to pump out more oil than ever, then it would challenge their narrative on climate doomsday. So they are trying to portray to the world that the leaders and the countries are moving away from fossil fuels, and they're also trying to portray a sense that people believe that fossil fuels are evil. But the reality is that it's completely opposite, and oil explorations are increasing like never before. And so they want to intentionally hide this from the public, so that the public have a misconception that we are moving beyond oil, gas, and coal. So that is the kind of alternate reality they want to convey to the people, and that's the reason they try to avoid the Middle East scenario as much as possible.
Yeah. It's going to be a slow move, particularly with regard to transportation fuel, in that oil now provides roughly 99% of all the energy used for transportation around the world. We're just not going to bring that down very fast. Well, you also reveal in that article what might be called a dirty little secret. Major Western oil companies are facilitating that boom in oil production in developing countries, despite their marketing that positions them as championing wind and solar to curb climate change. You cite British Petroleum, or BP, as an example. What has it done in this regard?
Yeah, UK and especially Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been portraying the country as one that's moving away from fossil fuels. And last month they even announced that the government is going to stop investments and funding for fossil fuel projects offshore in other countries. But in reality, what you have is a London headquartered British Petroleum in tie-up with their partners in Iraq, UAE, and I believe Oman, and they are increasing investments, making more partnerships to increase exploration. And the reason they give is that it's economical for them to do, and it's profitable for them to do oil exploration and partnerships with other oil companies in the Middle East. So it seems you have a bipolar a nation in England where the economy is driven towards the fossil fuels, whereas the philosophy of the leadership over there is trying to communicate a message that the country is not.
Okay, bipolar. I love that as a description of a country. Now we can go back to Africa, but this time not northern, but sub-Saharan Africa, the world's poorest major region. In the Christian Post on May 15, you had an article titled Liquefied Petroleum Gas, Essential to Alleviating Energy Poverty in Africa. Now, most of us in America think of LPG basically as what we get in small canisters that we hook up to our outdoor grills when we have our parties in the summertime. By no means a necessity of life, just something we use for occasional barbecuing. Why is the introduction and spread of LPG so important to the poor in sub-Saharan Africa, and for that matter, other poorer countries around the world? What does it replace for cooking and heating fuel?
Yeah, as you mentioned, Cal, it's quite difficult for a person who was born and brought up in the Western part of the world to understand the importance of LPG. The culture shock is also a reverse. For us in the developing world and in the poor countries, we do not, we have never seen an entire city cooking without LPG or through cooking through electricity. So there's a huge divide in the world, and and we should actually be thankful that countries in the developing part of the world are beginning to use LPG. So all this while, people were using uh, charcoal, wood, and even cow dung as a cooking fuel, not outside their house but inside their house. So that is how they were cooking. And international organizations like United Nations, the World Bank have been continuously striving to implement cooking stove and LPG connection, LPG supply to countries in Africa, South America, and Asia. So this has been a massive task, and still a lot of people are behind the targets that they have set. For instance, in sub-Saharan Africa, nearly 900 million people do not have access to liquid petroleum. LPG, and they don't have electricity as well to cook, so they depend on natural fuel like wood and cow dung to cook. And it is estimated that even at the current rate of uh, transition, uh, still 800 million people in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, would be without a clean cooking fuel source by 2030. So in 10 years, still 800 million people in Africa would not have a clean source of cooking fuel. So that's a scenario we are talking about. And as you know, all the other sources, primitive sources, that is wood, coal, and cow dung, they are very injurious to health because they increase the air pollution inside the houses, a leading cause of death. Nearly 4 million people per year die from indoor air pollution. That is more than the number of people COVID has killed so far, according to Johns
Hmm.
Hopkins database. Yeah. So,
Wow. So, I was about to ask you how many people in sub-Saharan Africa currently use those filthy solid fuels like wood and dried dung as their primary cooking and heating fuels, but you already answered that at around 900 million. So, what's the
yeah.
best way for them to graduate from those disease causing fuels to something cleaner? Lots of people think right away of wind and solar, but you disagree with them. Why?
Firstly, wind and solar are not as clean as what people might think. Secondly, for practical reasons, they do not offer you as a long-term, affordable, and reliable source of cooking fuel. So, wind does not work when there is no wind, and you cannot go hungry just because there is no wind. And solar likewise does not work in the night time and when it's cloudy or when it's raining. So, cooking and food is a very essential thing for a human being, apart from a roof on his head, above his head. So, these two are the basic necessities, and LPG offers a very clean form of cooking fuel. You just procure the natural gas from a dealer. You cook. There is no pollution to it, and it is branded as the safest cooking fuel by the Indian government, by the United Nations, and that's why they are trying day and night to get people transition from wood, charcoal, cow dung to LPG.
Now, it's not only it's not only people who would benefit from the transition from those much dirtier fuels to LPG, but also forests. And
Yeah.
because of the benefit to forests, biodiversity in soils and rivers and lakes would also benefit. How does that happen?
For majority of the people, for example, if we consider sub-Saharan Africa, wood is the primary cooking fuel, and that leads to a lot of deforestation. So the cause of wood as a cooking fuel being the reason for a significant amount of deforestation is a very well attested cause, and it is recognized by studies and by governments that deforestation for cooking purposes does have a major impact, and it is significant when it comes to the issue of deforestation. So by transitioning to LPG, a lot of countries in Africa could reduce their deforestation. I think it is Ghana which lost 2% of forests to deforestation, primarily associated with the need for cooking fuel. And so that is the reason why a change and a transition to LPG would help save forests, the ecosystem as well. And besides, LPG is also known to improve the socioeconomic status of people group, even households. A very comprehensive study was done in Cameroon, in West Africa. So yeah, it has multiple benefits.
Okay. 4 articles down, 6 to go. And we're
Okay.
right about halfway through the program. So we're doing okay. On April 26 at masterresource.org, you published an article called Nigeria Places Its Bet on Oil, Gas, and Coal to Secure Its Energy Future. You challenge recent reports that Nigeria, which is North Africa's largest economy, is turning away from oil and gas to renewables. What are some of the facts that support your challenge?
Yeah, I saw a claim on the mainstream media that said that Nigeria and its leadership is looking to move away from fossil fuels. That surprised me because it's not just a big economy in North Africa. In entire Africa, it's one of the fastest growing economies. And from history, we know that no country has a rapid economic progression without the use of fossil fuels as a foundational support for their economic growth. So when I dig in the numbers, it was pretty evident that Nigeria has done anything but to move away from fossil fuels. So what they've done is they've reaffirmed their commitment to increasing oil production, and to do that, to enable that, they have even introduced a bill that will increase the profits of the oil companies, so they'll be encouraged to do more exploration and production. And besides that, they've also entered into a number of partnerships, and they're also seeking oil investments. So with regard to the oil sector, they are not going anywhere. They are increasing their oil dependency. When it comes to coal, Nigeria has high potential. Currently, they depend less on coal, but with billions of resources, coal reserves, I'm sorry, with billions of coal reserves estimated to be in the country, more and more energy experts in Nigeria are calling for the country to utilize those assets. And Nigeria is commissioning a number of new coal plants and also a number of new natural gas plants. Together, these new power plants will help them achieve a significant increase in electricity production by 2030, I believe. Yeah. So the reality is again completely different from what the media is trying to portray. We see an increased commitment from the leadership for fossil fuels, and of course, they would be talking in a way where they are trying to appease the Western economies, that they are doing their part to fight climate and so on. So, but if you look at their energy statistics and where the money is going into, it's pretty evident that they are sticking with the fossil fuels.
You also mentioned that around that Nigeria plans not only to use more oil and natural gas, but also to use a lot more coal. Now, in the West, people tend to think of coal as a filthy fuel, very dirty fuel. I think they're mistaken to do so because we can use it in very clean ways in the West. But how do people in Africa feel about coal by comparison with the fuels that they're used to?
Yeah, from what I've known through my research, going across countries in sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa and in South Africa, the overall majority of experts there believe that Africa must be allowed to use the coal reserves that exist in the country, and they say that it's unfair for developed Western countries to impose uh, these restrictive energy policies, especially with regard to fossil fuels. So they don't view coal as dirty, they view coal as a lifesaver. And that's what coal has been in the Western democracy for a long time. Like the industrial revolution and the progress of the Western society during the past 2 centuries can be attributed to a few important factors, and one among them is coal. By There is no argument on that. And that is maybe the Western democracy. The people in the West have been made to forget about the quintessential need for coal by the mainstream media, but the use of coal remains the same. How it was during the Industrial Revolution, it remains the same in Africa today as well. So they don't
Hmm.
view coal as dirty. Yeah.
Okay. Now, you also mentioned that around 20 million Nigerians, which is 45% of the population, aren't connected to the nation's electricity grid. For them, that means using the filthiest fuels for cooking and heating. Um, I've read various places that the average sub-Saharan African woman spends literally 8 hours a day doing nothing but just gathering wood and dried dung to use for cooking and heating. Uh, you know, how does that impact their opportunity to climb out of poverty?
Yeah, as I alluded to it earlier, there was a study done in Cameroon, country that's adjacent to Nigeria. So there, it was found out that stopping women from spending so much hours on collecting their cooking fuel and enabling them to be occupied with other stuff not only helps with alleviating poverty but saw immediate effect on their socioeconomic status, their health, and overall improvement in their livelihood. So that was the found that was the results from the study. But I can't stop but think about the scenario over here in India as well, where I live. In India, it's been the same case. A lot of our communities, even where I live, half an hour from here, we have communities who have seen phenomenal change in their lives when they moved from just spending hours and hours trying to collect fuel, instead of that, like engaging themselves in an active source of income that resulted in overall improvement in their livelihood. Yeah.
Yeah. I can just imagine how most Americans would feel if 8 hours a day of their labor were to buy for them nothing but cooking fuel
Hmm.
and heating fuel. Uh,
Yeah.
Nothing left over, nothing for a car, nothing for air conditioning, nothing for a
Yeah.
nice big house. You know, Americans would never want to live that way. And why they favor policies that would keep poor people around the world living that way is truly tragic and inexplicable. We do have one comment on Facebook. This is from Guy Takamatsu, and I wonder if Vijay, you would give us your thoughts on it after I pass it along. Guy says, I wonder if South Sudan should take a look at the benefits of peace which came to Northern Ireland. Since the peace agreement came into effect, big companies such as Microsoft and Boeing invested in Northern Ireland. The former warring factions have benefited financially due to peace and investment. And the threat of renewed civil strife in Thailand has caused some companies there to leave and head for for Ireland or other places. Many people in Thailand have pointed out the benefits of peace that came to Northern Ireland. You want to make a quick comment about that, Vijay, before we have a little quick break?
Yeah, I wish that would happen in South Sudan as well. But just an interesting thing, the recent peace agreement that we have is between opposing factions. So one of them is now the chief of the country, the other one is the deputy chief. So together they are running the country. But in their peace agreement, they agreed with each other to implement a lot of steps that would progress peace, that would cement their union. But both the parties have not implemented all those steps until now. And that's why international observers feel that this could break at any time. Yeah, like how Guy said, they should learn from other countries and start making move, especially when you have a oil sector that has good promises for the future. So it's high time that they should get on with it. Yeah.
Okay, now on to a quick reminder to our viewers that through the end of the month of May, as our way of saying thank you when you make a donation of literally any size, we'd be delighted to send you this wonderful study, Fix America's Forests, that explains that it's not global warming that has driven the increased number and size of forest wildfires in the West over the last few years. It is not global warming, not climate change. It is instead poor forest management. And this study shows how that can be solved and thus preserve forests and all of the ecosystems that they involve and the biodiversity that they serve as well. To request your copy, simply go to cornwallalliance.org, click on the donate button, and as you fill out the donation form, when you come to the comments field, just write in promo code 21-05 or the title Fix America's Forests, and we'll be glad to send that to you. Now, on to article number 6, Vijay. China funds Africa's fossil fuel renaissance to Africa's and the world's peril, which you published April 24 at AmericanThinker.com. Here you see both good and bad in the fact that China is funding a great deal of energy development, especially of electric generating plants and grids in Africa, because that will help Africans overcome poverty. Yet you also warn that there are some significant dangers involved in that. So what are the pros and cons here?
Yeah. So I think most of the people in the world are unaware of the fact that China has been silently creeping upon the global map by literally converting most of Africa into its a land of its partnership, technically investing huge sums of money in African countries. And these countries need that because last year the African Development Bank, the key source of funding agent to African countries that flows through Europe and North America, it decided that it won't fund any more fossil fuel projects in Africa. So that became a big blow to the countries that we discussed until now, for all of them who were hoping on funds to arrive in order to invest more in fossil fuel exploration and production, because their economies need that. And so when they were in this situation, China was already a player in Africa, and they began increasing their investments, and they even initiated the Belt and Road Initiative, a mechanism through which they would invest billions of dollars in hundreds of countries across the globe, including many African countries. So for African countries, this was a big boon. They viewed it as a welcome move. But we also have experts who suggest that China's dominance in the African continent is reaching a tipping point where it's becoming very dangerous, because many of these nations are indebted to China. So they have to pay China back, and that's not going to happen anytime soon. As a result, China is at a vantage position of exerting more geopolitical dominance over the Western democracies like UK and some of the nations in Europe and US. So it's an interesting scenario that's playing out in Africa.
Yeah, and most of the Western democracies refuse to fund fossil fuel development in
Hmm.
developing countries, purportedly in order to fight climate change. But ironically, what that's doing is handing over more power to China, which is the world's largest user of fossil fuels. Well, article number 7 for our brief tour tonight. On April 17, Vijay, you published in townhall.com an open letter to John Kerry from people living in energy poverty. First, why did you choose the open letter genre for this?
Well, an open letter because it was straight from the heart. It's from the people here, including myself. So uh, I wanted it to be a communication directly from the people here to Mr. Kerry, because I didn't want it to go through any other channel, like not at a part of a report or not as a part of a normal opinion column, but a letter that comes straight from the people here about what we think, and what's the reality over here. So that's why the open letter genre.
Okay, all right. Now, you wrote to Kerry, who is President Biden's special presidential envoy for climate, shortly after he visited your own country of India. What did he ask the people of India to do that you think was wrong, and why do you think so?
Uh, the energy scenario in India is in a situation where we depend on fossil fuels for majority of our primary energy needs. Coal alone contributes to more than 70% of the electricity that is consumed in India. So for Mr. Kerry to come and say that you have to forgo coal or to reduce dependency on oil and gas, it's not that great. In fact, Mr. Kerry, I think he should be aware that India's import of oil and gas from US during the past 3 years have risen rapidly, exponentially, I would call it. So while the US is producing oil and gas to such high extent where it can export to other nations, and India being the primary, one of the biggest buyer of fossil fuels from America, it was not right for Mr. Kerry to come and ask us to forgo the very source of energy in a country where still like 300 million people have either no electricity or shoddy connection to electricity, and a lot of us face power blackouts on a regular basis. So that's the scenario over
Yeah,
here, and yeah.
yeah. You know, don't use oil, but we'll sell it to you. I think that's what the
Yeah.
American message has been under President Biden with Mr. Kerry. You think it's a bit hypocritical for multimillionaire Kerry to fly around in private jets while asking poor Indians to cut back on fossil fuel use. Expand on that for us a little bit.
Yeah, when I first thought about that, I just imagine, Mr. Kerry, you're flying all the way over here, and you are using your private jet to get an environmental award in Europe, and your private jets are making rounds inside US. I think I was thinking, well, the combined carbon emissions just from his private trips and by his business trips uh, would be more than a lot of villages combined together in rural India. that would be the amount
Hmm.
of carbon emissions coming from him. And for him to come and ask us in rural India, a poor person under the poverty line, to forgo his dreams of having uninterrupted electricity is a bit hypocritical. Yeah, so he should avoid doing that.
Yeah, I think so. Now, just a few days before that article, masterresource.org published your article, The Fossil Fuel Dichotomy: Biden and the East's Contrasting Energy Approach. There you asked, quote, could we be heading into an East-West dichotomy where different directions for the energy sector are pursued, making the East more energy secure and imperiling energy security in the West? Explain what makes you think we could be headed there.
So ever since the Paris Agreement came into motion in 2016, I've noticed a strange phenomena of the leadership in the Western economies, except for the previous US president, of course, driving their economies away from fossil fuels through very aggressive policies. At the same time, I noticed that developing countries, especially in the East, uh, in Asia, are though they are part of the Paris Agreement, and though they tend to make grand promises at the international conferences year after year, they are sticking with their original plan of increasing their fossil fuel dependency in through 2-3 decades in the future. So that's how they are all looking at it, and they are not ready to compromise on their fossil fuel consumption anytime soon. And so I noticed a divergence of policies in the West and in the East, to say. So that is why I penned it that way.
You report that India plans on using much more coal in the future, to the consternation of Western diplomats focused on fighting global warming. Why would India do that if, as is commonly thought in the West, man made climate change is a crisis around the corner, indeed, even an existential threat?
Yeah, well, for India, the impact of climate change has not been here. Like, we have not seen impact of climate change, despite the flashy headlines about India that viewers over there might see on your mainstream news media. Uh, we've had no impact on our rainfall, which our agriculture sector depends on, and our leadership and the scientists over here do not see climate change in the same way that the West sees, and especially at the juncture where our country is at the developing stage, critical phase, where we are bringing more and more people out of the poverty line. We cannot afford to reduce our energy input from fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are the only energy source that provide reliable, affordable, and uh, long-term fuel source. India has tons and tons of reserves that can last for a number of decades, and that's why we've been on a roll trying to increase the number of coal plants, the number of coal mines, the investments into those equipments, and be it a procurement of oil and gas from offshore assets from other countries. You take oil, natural gas, and coal across the board. India has been aggressively pushing for an increase in imports, production, and also consumption. So that's the way India is headed, and they are very pretty clear about that. And I'm sure behind the screen, they are aware that they are not going to fall prey for the climate doomsday, propaganda that seeks to force restrictive energy policies upon the country.
Excellent. Two articles to go. We're now on
Yeah.
article number 9. Fossil
Yep.
fuels help India overcome air pollution illnesses and deaths, which was published February 4 in the Christian Post. There you noted that the growing replacement of wood and dung by liquid petroleum gas, LPG, reduced deaths from indoor air pollution in India by nearly two-thirds from 1990 to 2019. Help Americans understand why indoor air pollution, which we almost never even think about, is so deadly in the developing world.
Yeah, so uh, as I pointed out earlier, the deaths from indoor air pollution is higher than outdoor air pollution. You'd be shocked to hear that. And I've seen images of New Delhi and cities from the state of Uttar Pradesh in India constantly being beamed across Western mainstream media and saying that people in India are dying of air pollution. Yes, outdoor air pollution does cause irritation. It does impact a few people, but not to the extent that indoor air pollution does. Indoor air pollution like literally kills people. As I pointed out earlier, more than 4 million deaths per year. And the people who are concerned about gender disparity might want to take note that the women folk are impacted more because a lot of cooking is done by the women folk in developing countries, and as pointed out earlier, they are the ones who go in search of the wood as well. uh, and So indoor pollution has been a big challenge for the government here when it comes to death, and when it comes to alleviating mortality. The focus has always been on indoor air pollution. And outdoor air pollution, yes, it's there, but not to the extent of indoor air pollution. So this is something that uh, the people in the Western countries must take note of, and understand why LPG is so essential for developing countries and poor countries. It changes people's life in their lifetime. So it's very critical.
In that article, Vijay, you wrote, "It could not be stated any clearer. Gas, a fossil fuel, is literally the difference between good health and sickness in millions of Indian households. It is also affordable and abundant. Yet leaders in countries like the United States vilify it. Even worse, the current Biden administration has declared war on all fossil fuels." Vijay, give us an Indian's perspective on President Biden's energy policy.
Yeah, President Biden, right from the offset, has been against fossil fuels, and he even implemented his uh, his policies. The most recent being the Keystone pipeline project, which he cancelled, and apart from that, he's also stopped fossil fuel exploration on lands that do not belong to, on all lands except for the lands that belong to native Indians, I believe. So he has been very keen on doing that, and he has also informed people that the US administration would exert its influence in international political forums to coerce developing countries and poor countries to move away from fossil fuels, which is a very dangerous policy. His policies not only impact the energy security of American future, but also uh, the current energy security of developing countries, and that would mean a big deal for people in rural parts of developing countries who are uh, pinning their hopes on increased energy access, especially from fossil fuels. So his policies are more dangerous than what it's believed to be.
Okay, when I said a little bit ago that we had only two articles to go, I was mistaken. Now we have only two to go. Looking
Okay.
back a couple of months earlier on February 1, masterresource.org published your article, Environmental Activism as Carbon Imperialism, Nightmare for the Poor. What do you mean by carbon imperialism?
Yeah, it can also be termed as carbon colonialism. Colonialism. So, what I'm referring to here is a new form of colonization where Western powers exert restrictive energy policies upon developing nations, where these policies restrict the economic growth of these countries, and they cannot do anything about it but submit to them, because many of these countries depend on funding from these Western countries, and even if they don't receive funding, they are threatened with sanctions if they do not reduce fossil fuels, all in the name of climate change. So it is a new form of imperialism, where the economic and the energy policies forced upon countries, including India, are restricting our development and our liberty and our right to use natural resources that are available to us. So that is why the term imperialism. Yeah.
Okay. Now, you don't really discuss this very much in that article, but does the demand to switch from fossil fuels to wind, solar, and other renewables, what we really should call unreliables, I think, does that really harm people in the richer, more developed world as well as the poor in the developing world? And if so, how?
Yeah, definitely. The most recent example we had was from Texas. Despite a lot of effort to deny it, it was pretty clear that the decision by the state of Texas to move away from renewables move away from fossil fuels and invest more on renewables over a consistent period of time, and their over dependence on renewables for the present energy needs together caused a major blackout when the winter hit the state. And another example would be California, where during the forest fires, the country's weak energy grid was exposed, and the governor acknowledged that renewables have contributed to this problem. So you have prime examples in the US, which is a very rich country, and for developing countries, the problem is much more bigger, because we have a developing transmission network. Our network is not yet fully developed, and having highly oscillating input from the renewables, which is not consistent, into the grid that is already developing and not full, causes a lot of disruption. And this I know from eyewitness and first-hand accounts in my hometown region. So the country cannot afford to do that at this stage. So renewables are not a solution like how people make it to be. uh, they are nowhere close to substituting fossil fuels, and even if countries forcefully make the transition, it would, in no time, they would return back to reliance on fossil fuels.
Okay. Okay, so we come to our last article now. This was published by our friends at the Global Warming Policy Foundation back on January 14, titled EU's Carbon Border Taxes and Joe Biden's Clean Energy Plans, a Double Threat for Developing Countries. What are carbon border taxes and why are they such a threat to the poor in developing countries?
So essentially, carbon border taxes are a set of new taxes which has been introduced by the EU, the European Union, but also UK, since it's separated from the EU. So the basic essence of this taxes is that they're going to tax on any product that comes from a developing nation which has been manufactured or produced in a carbon intensive manner. So when a company or a person from a developing country brings their products into European Union, and now Biden is also proposing a similar law. So what happens is they have to pay tax to the governments in EU and in US because those products were produced or manufactured in a carbon intensive manner.
Okay, there are a couple of cartoons in this article that I think are well worth seeing. I'd like you to explain them to us. First, there's this one. We are collecting carbon taxes for the rich world, say men at a border crossing, welcome to the West, to someone coming from the two-thirds world with an export box on his head. This is called tax the poor. Uh, what's
Yeah.
the point of that, Vijay?
Yeah, if you look at the cartoon, it's pretty evident that the person who's coming to sell the product is coming from a country that's not yet developed, and they are trying to gain economic progress by manufacturing and selling. But what happens here is that they are not allowed to trade freely with the EU unless they submit to their aggressive carbon tax regime. I'll take India for example. India is a big exporter of aluminium and cement, and we export cement to UK, for instance, and Europe as well. So when we do that, cement are produced in high carbon intensive factories, so they would be taxed heavily, and in return, those taxes might be passed on to the end user over here, and which would eventually result in economic stagnation or less profits. So that is the cycle that these carbon taxes initiate, and what we see here is a description of that. And as you can see, the guy is really distraught at what's happening, and those in turn, the guys on the other side of the fence, they are getting richer because they have a tax out of nothing. So yeah.
So this really turns into a redistribution of wealth from the poor to the rich, while keeping the poor poor. Then there's also this second cartoon in that article, uh, Uncle Sam saying to somebody cooking his food over an open fire, "You know that $100 billion we promised? We decided you should pay for it." Now, what is Uncle Sam referring to there as that $100 billion we promised? And how is it that the developing world would wind up paying for that?
Yeah, so Sam, if I'm right, here represents the collective Western economies that are developed.
Well,
So what
actually,
happened?
Uncle Sam represents the United States, U.S. Uncle Sam,
Yeah.
United States.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And what I mean to say is, here, although he represents the larger Western economy in general, with US being the main cash cow, I would say, of the Paris Agreement, we are referring here to the US the partners of US who collectively promised $100 billion to developing countries, $100 billion every year as a pool of climate fund to developing countries, so that they would transition from fossil fuels to renewables. However, this money was never put into place, and the UN has not released any update as to when this funding target would be met. Meanwhile, countries like India, China, and others have been repeatedly saying that this was part of the agreement that they had with the Western economies during the signing of Paris Agreement in 2016, but it never happened. So this picture portrays that, and the guy sitting down represents the developing countries.
Yeah, a sad, sad thing, I think. Well, you insist that what the West is doing with these carbon border taxes is inconsistent with common calls for what is called climate justice. Why? How is that inconsistent?
Uh, Coming back to the Paris Agreement again, so when it began, uh, a consortium of developing countries, India leading the way, of course, came up with the concept of climate justice, where they said to the developed economies of the world, look, you've used coal, oil, and all the fossil fuels to be in a situation where your countries are developed, and they said that developing countries should be allowed to do the same, to have access to fossil fuels, to be able to have the time to make a transition, which I think it's just a promise. No one has really followed up on that. So
Mm.
they said that it is unfair for nations that have uh, uh, rooted their economies on fossil fuels to come and say other nations which are struggling in poverty to not embark on a fossil journey. So that is where the climate justice principle came in, and countries like India demanded money. And going back, the now money was never promised, and India continues to be. India's, by the way, is one of the biggest consumers of coal and oil next to China. So they've been in protest, but they've also been kind to the developed economies because they are allies. But it will be surprising to see how long this lasts.
Okay, well, Vijay, thank you again for joining us on this evening's program for us. It's tomorrow morning's program for you, very, very early in the morning.
Yeah.
Really appreciate you doing that. Do you have any closing comments for us? Last things you would want to say to people in America and the rest of the Western, more developed world as a spokesman for the poor in developing countries?
Yeah, there's a couple of things I would like to say. One is I would like people to take more interest and time in understanding what's going on in the developed part of the world, and what's the reality over there, and where the energy needs stands at, and when that side of the world meets the Western developed world, they would need to have a proper perspective of how things here are. So that would be one request. And another thing would be, I would ask you to contact your local representative in Congress, and convey to them that you support energy access, especially to fossil fuels in developing countries, and that President Biden's policies need to be changed. So that is one more thing that I would request. Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Vijay. It's been a pleasure having you on the program, and I look forward to the next time we do this. Meanwhile, folks, our topic next week will be the woke movement, social justice, cultural Marxism, critical race theory, and all such things tied to those. Our guest will be John Hodges, director of the Center for Western Studies in Memphis, Tennessee. This is a marvelous educational center that I respect and admire very, very greatly. One of my daughters has been through it, as a matter of fact, and I do some teaching for it. But there are a number of other teachers for it, helping young people to go through the history of Western civilization in philosophy and theology and literature and art and music and architecture and other parts of culture. It's an absolutely fascinating program. I would recommend it for any person who is considering going to college, but for that matter, for anybody of any age. Even though it bills itself as a gap year program between high school and college, it really is a tremendously beneficial educational program. So, John Hodges, director of the Center for Western Studies, will be our guest next week. One last reminder, and that is that through the end of May, we at the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation will be glad to send, as our way of saying thanks when you make a donation of literally any size, a copy of this study, Fix America's Forests, which explains why it's not climate change but poor forest management that has led to the catastrophic wildfires of the last few years in America's West. The solutions are clear, the solutions are well understood, What's needed is broader public appreciation of this, and then pressure on our political decision makers to adopt such policies. To ask for your copy, simply go to cornwallalliance.org, click on the donate button, make a donation of literally any size, no matter how small. It'll be 100% tax deductible. And in the comments field of the donation form, simply enter promo code 21-05 or the title Fix America's Forests, and we will be delighted to send it to you. Until next week, the Lord be with you and bless you and make his face to shine upon you. Take care.